Life can be messy, but you don't have to figure it out alone.
Hey, it's the Luskos.
Join pastors and best-selling authors Levi and Jenny Lusko on Hey, It's the Luskos for honest conversations about faith, marriage, family, grief, ministry, and all the unexpected moments in between. You'll laugh, you'll be encouraged, and you'll be reminded that God is faithful through every season.
It will always come back to Jesus in the end.
That's right. Tune in to Hey, It's the Luskos with Levi and Jenny Lusko. Available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm thrilled you can join us today. Wondering if you're worried about having Alzheimer's disease or how to keep your brain healthy. We're going to be talking about that today with a neuroscientist. Also, he is the CEO of Posit Science and the leader of neuroplasticity research. And he's actually developed BrainHQ, which is the most scientifically validated brain training app on the market today. So, before I introduce you to our guest, I am just going to encourage people to check out Alzheimer Speaks and all of our free educational resources that come in a myriad of mediums for you to pick from, as well as our sister company, Dementia Map, which is a global resource directory. Both are free, so you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about any pop-ups trying to grab your information. We just want a safe place where you can get good, solid information for your needs in your own situation. And one last thing I want to mention is a company called Q for Good. They are a fabulous webmaster if you're in need. Check them out. So let's go ahead and meet our guest today. Henry, I am so excited to have you on the show. You've been doing some fascinating work for many years, and I've kind of been, a voyeur in the background, kind of watching what you're doing and seeing your work expand and really grow and kind of come to the forefront. So if you don't mind introducing yourself to our audience and just giving them a little bit of background, that would be wonderful.
Sure. My name's Henry Mahncke, and hey, I'm a neuroscientist by training. I came out to the University of California, San Francisco in the early 90s to do a PhD in neuroscience. And I had the great honor and pleasure to work in just an amazing lab run by a guy named Dr. Michael Mahncke. And that was fundamentally the lab that discovered that the adult brain is plastic. It's capable of rewiring and changing itself. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that, Lori. But let me just say that, hey, at the time I started graduate school, most people didn't really believe it. And by the time I ended graduate school, pretty much everyone believed it. And then after graduate school, I went on to do some other things. I worked at a consulting firm where I focused on healthcare work across medical devices and pharmaceuticals and biotech startups. And then I also did a bunch of work at that consulting firm with video games. And because I've loved video games ever since I was a little kid. And then one day, my PhD advisor, Mike Mahncke, called me up and he said, hey, remember all that brain plasticity stuff? He said, we've put that to work in the lab. We've helped a lot of rats build better brains. We've helped a lot of monkeys build better brains. Don't you think it's time we helped some people build some better brains? And, I looked at all the work I had been doing in healthcare and video games and said, well, hey, we're going to collide these two things, right? We're going to make a healthcare product that's based on video games and neuroplasticity. So I signed up. I became the first employee here at Posit Science, which became BrainHQ. And then, I helped build a lot of brain training exercises. I helped run large-scale gold standard clinical trials to show that they worked. And then I became the CEO here a few years ago now. really just to further that mission of getting the science out of the lab and into the world. And we've been doing a ton of that and had a lot of really exciting studies come out recently.
Oh, fun. Well, we can't wait to hear all about them. One of the questions I ask all my guests is, have you been personally touched in your own family or sphere of friends by dementia?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think, one of the interesting things about working here at BrainHQ is, hey, virtually every employee here, ranging from our newest one to our oldest one, which is me, everyone has had their lives touched by dementia or some other brain health condition. And that's because, hey, these are incredibly common conditions. I imagine virtually everyone you talk to has in some way, shape, or form been touched by them. So, in my particular case, my grandfather, passed away of what we now call Alzheimer's disease when I was about 10 years old. And that was way back in 1980. And, back then, Lori, as I'm sure you know, we didn't really have a very good scientific or clinical understanding of Alzheimer's disease. In fact, when my grandfather passed away, they pretty much said he had, senile dementia. And, what they meant by that was, well, hey, doesn't everyone kind of lose their memory and kind of have that kind of problems when they get old? And, we now understand that it's a lot more complicated than that. And my grandfather had a real medical disorder. This wasn't like a normal part of getting old. And, I remember to this day going with my dad to visit my grandfather in the home that he was in. He was in a senior care community because he couldn't care for himself. And, I of course remember the stress and the emotional challenge that put my dad through. Every time after we visited my grandfather when I was a kid, we'd go to the Lionel train store across the street from where my grandfather was. And when I was a little kid, I kind of thought, well, that was my father sort of giving me a little reward for coming. But I recognize as I've gotten older that was actually like therapy for my dad to get to go to the train store after he saw his dad. So it was a significant issue. And when I joined this company, when Mike called me up and said, hey, do you want to be the first employee here? I thought to myself, hey, work is hard and you have good days at work and you have bad days at work. That's true for everyone who works. But coming to work every day and working on brain health, working on ways that might prevent this kind of dread, concern of older age. I mean, that's a good reason to get up and come to work every day. And that's been motivating for me throughout my time here at BrainHQ and I think for everyone who comes here. So.
Wow. When you were talking about your grandpa in the 1980s, my mom lived with dementia for 30 years. And so she's been gone since 2014. But in the 80s is when we were really starting to see things kind of kick off. And I mean, people didn't even really use the word Alzheimer's disease, let alone dementia or neuroplasticity. I mean, none of that stuff was anything. My mom was told she had, it was just menopause for the first 10 years.
Oh my goodness, really?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And then when we did an actual autopsy, she had Alzheimer's, Lewy body, and Parkinson's.
Right. But the whole way through or at least for the beginning, they didn't take it quite as seriously, did they?
No, it was, depression, it was menopause, it was
Sure. Yeah.
but again, it's hard to diagnose. I mean, even today, it's hard to diagnose, and terms are becoming more general because they know it kind of switches because people have been told it's Alzheimer's and then it's MCI and no, now it's Lewy body or you got the trifecta of something too, so.
And all that's true, and yet I think the studies still show that probably 50% of people who are living with dementia are still not diagnosed despite all that. So on the one hand, there's a huge swath of people who are, I don't know, living at home, maybe being taken care of by their spouse, and no one quite knows why this is very challenging for them. And then on the other half, we get people who can get routed into these very advanced diagnostic procedures with brain scans and blood scans and cognitive testing. And, we get maybe a very fine diagnosis of what they have, but hey, can we help them yet is still an open question. So it's tough. It's tough. And 30 years for you as a caregiver, that is, I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm impressed and amazed at the same time.
Yeah, well, I'm back in it now with another family member.
Okay.
Now, and so it's interesting to see what has changed and what hasn't changed.
Yeah.
In 40 years, that's really kind of spooky in some ways.
We need a lot more progress, don't we?
Yeah, we sure do. And I don't think there's one answer that's gonna, be the end all be all, because all of us are different.
Right.
But there's so much out there that can help people, and so many people don't know because doctors aren't referring them out. And I was talking with a colleague the other day, and I said, yeah, I I was having a problem with my ankle, and you have your 10-minute appointment, and then they
Yeah.
print it all out. Well, then I got all this AI stuff of where to buy shoes and do that. None of that was discussed with the doctor, just pooped it out in the printer. But they're not doing that with people living with dementia.
Wow.
And it's like, there's no reason they shouldn't be doing that at this point, in my opinion,
Yep. I'm with you.
that. But we'll get into all of that stuff. So people are worried about dementia, Alzheimer's, so much more than they ever used to be, because thank God we're finally getting coverage of this now.
Yeah. Yep.
But what does that say about society, that there's such a great fear in that to you?
Well, there's a couple things it says, which is, on the one hand, as we're all living longer because, hey, science and medicine can take care of our bodies better.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, because of that, more and more people know someone in their family or a friend who's gone on to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And, it's scary, right? In the sense that, when you watch a friend or a family member go through that, as you have, and many of your listeners have, right? You see that insidious, that gradual change and that loss in them. And so there's more awareness of it because we're living longer and more people are around it. And at the same time, so many other disease conditions, like cancer, for example, we've just had incredible breakthroughs in terms of the science of understanding what's going on and the treatments, right? If you look at the history of breast cancer over the past 30 years, for example, wow, we have gotten a lot better at treating breast cancer, right? It's very scary to get that diagnosis, but hey, there are a lot of new medicines and a lot of new treatments that can help that to become a livable condition. At the same time, if you look at the past 30 years of Alzheimer's, we do not have that level of progress, right? There's really been almost no progress in terms of the medications that are available for Alzheimer's over the past 30 years. And so, we can talk about a few of the new ones if we like as we go forward. But I think that that's what contributes to the fear. There's more awareness because we see it, and everyone kind of knows, hey man, the science has not kept up. It has not led to new treatments. And that's scary to think that something can happen to you and hey, we don't have a lot for you. So I think that contributes to the fears. We've done surveys, we've read a lot of surveys, and that fear of cognitive decline and dementia really is the number one fear for people who are in their 60s and above. And when we look at those surveys, we see that people are more afraid, more concerned, more worried about dementia than they are about cancer. They're more concerned about it than they are about controlling their finances as they get older. In many cases, they're more concerned about dementia than they are even about losing a spouse. And so that tells you exactly what you're saying, that, hey, this is a top of mind concern for just about everyone as we get older.
Yeah, it's been really scary. And then, you'd mentioned some of the new drugs when we've got, the FDA approval kind of fighting, is this going to be approved or not be approved? I mean, that doesn't gain confidence in society that we're moving in the right direction or that we can trust what we're being told, as a whole.
Yeah.
And people are always told, to stay mentally active, but no one really defines, like, what the heck does that mean? What am I supposed to do? Is it word games? Is it puzzles? Is it video games? And no one out there, for the most part, is saying the whys behind, the tasks. And I think we have to raise the level of the whys in an understandable fashion.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
Hey listeners, it's Kelly from Life Audio. We know life gets busy, and sometimes it's easy for your faith to get pushed to the side. That's why we created The Good Word, a free weekly newsletter designed to give you a moment to slow down, be encouraged, and reconnect with what matters most, God's Word. Inside, you'll find devotionals, guided prayers, podcast recommendations, and other faith-filled content we think you'll love. No ads, no clutter. Just good content to help you stay rooted in God's Word throughout your week. Sign up for The Good Word today at lifeaudio.com/The Good Word. That's lifeaudio.com/The Good Word.
For people.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And this is, right up the line of expertise that I have in this field, I can say. And, I think what maybe a lot of people have known is that there are what they're called observational studies out there where, a scientist follows a large group of people for 10 or 20 years and just kind of asks them, how do they live their life, right? How much physical exercise do you have? How do you eat? And how much do you engage in like cognitively stimulating activities? And what those observational studies show for sure is that people who eat right and people who exercise and people who stay mentally active, they have a lower risk of going on to dementia, or when they get dementia, they get it later on in their life. And that has led, like you say, to this notion that, healthy living, including like staying mentally active, we'll get back to that in a minute, but that's led to this notion that, that's going to help us. And that idea is kind of further confirmed by this idea that scientists have come up with over the past decade or two around what's called cognitive reserve or brain reserve. And this has got a pretty interesting story behind it, and you're up in Minnesota, so I'm going to say a few words about this. There was an incredible study that has been done with a group of nuns who live up in Minnesota, and this study was run by a researcher out of Washington University originally. And the amazing thing about this nunnery is that, these young women joined, as young women, as 17, 18, 19, 21, 22, 23. And they, as a result, had fantastic records of, what these women were like when they were young. And then as they aged, this nunnery sort of made the collective decision, as you mentioned about your own mom, to donate their brains for science to figure out what was going on. And, some of them got dementia and some of them didn't. And when they did those autopsies and looked at their brains, they learned something just amazing, which was, a lot of these nuns had the biological symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. They had what are called those plaques and those tangles, which are these proteins that get deposited in the brain that we think are harmful. But a lot of the nuns who had those brain chemical signals of Alzheimer's didn't have Alzheimer's, right? They were taking care of themselves. They were a vibrant part of the life of the convent and so forth until the day they passed. And that raised this idea of what now scientists call cognitive reserve or brain reserve, which is, there was something these nuns were doing that meant that their brains could resist the effects of the onset of Alzheimer's disease, right? Now, nobody knew what it was, but it was very clear that you could have two nuns with the same level of plaques and tangles, and one had Alzheimer's and one didn't. And so they looked a lot at, what was different about the nuns who resisted this effect? And, long story short, because they had the amazing records on these women, they could look back at even to the entry exams they had written to join the nunnery, right, when they were 18 years old. And they found that the nuns who expressed their thoughts with more complex language were the ones who were more likely to resist the effect of dementia. And that led to this idea that, keeping your brain active, that engaging in intellectual activities could contribute to brain reserve or cognitive reserve, and that might make you less likely to get dementia. And that's a pretty powerful idea, right? The way scientists think about it is, think about your brain like a gas tank, right? And as you drive, which is to say, as you get older, use up gas bit by bit, right? And hey, when you're out of gas, your car doesn't go anymore and your brain gets dementia. But hey, what happens with a gas tank, right? Well, hey, things can happen to make the gas tank more leaky, right? You punch a hole in it and the gas leaks out. And that similarly is the idea that in your brain, there are things that can happen to you in your life that make you more susceptible to dementia, right? Maybe you get cancer. Maybe you get a head injury. Maybe you suffer from depression. All those things kind of take gas out of the tank and make you more likely to get dementia. But conversely, there are things you can do to put gas in the tank. There are things that can build brain reserve that can reduce your risk of going on to dementia over time. So that was a pretty exciting kind of mental model of what we should all be doing. And that I think led us to exactly what you said a moment ago, which is, okay, now when you go into a doctor and you say, hey, I'm worried about Alzheimer's disease, the doctor's going to tell you, well, hey, stay mentally active. Maybe the doctor's even going to say, eat a healthy diet or exercise. But that still does leave us with the question, as you correctly said, well, what am I supposed to do, right? And so that's and I have a ton to say about it, but I'll pause there for a moment and say, hey, that's what's led us to the point that you correctly call out. But I think people are looking for more specific direction, and they deserve more specific direction.
Yeah, the nun study I always found fascinating, and yet so much of our research is still going down that it's plaques and tangles, and it's like, no, that was disproven that it's not.
I know.
and I'm like, want to rip my hair out with that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I don't hear people talking about the nun study, which I think is really important, is, I mean, I think of people who have entered the convent and stuff as they have a purpose.
Yeah.
They're engaged. They stay
Absolutely.
busy. They feel valued, and to me, that is one of the biggest gaping holes that we have. And I think there's all different types of ways to stay engaged, from doing a video game and maybe you're competing with people you don't know, or just watching numbers or your own score. You get that competitiveness and you get those, sparks flying in your head, because again, it's not just one zone, and it kind of affects your overall being. I mean, I look at young kids playing video games, and they're talking about their scores, they got their headsets on, and they're talking with people around the world they don't even know, and they're their best friends. They just feel engaged, and I think that is so critically important and needs to be taken so much more seriously.
Absolutely. We know now that one of the risk factors for Alzheimer's and dementia is loneliness, is social isolation. And to put that on its head, one of the protective factors to resist the onset of Alzheimer's is social engagement with friends, with family, with your community. And that's probably pretty broad, right? It can mean that you take a hot dish over to your neighbor, or it could also mean that you're playing StarCraft against some person in China at night, and but you have a relationship with them, right? Like you said, you have friends with them. And so I think what that tells us is, it brings us back to the idea of brain plasticity, right? So again, when I was doing my graduate work, the lab I was in discovered that the adult brain can rewire itself as a result of what we ask it to do. And that's an incredible, exciting, and powerful idea. When I started graduate school, what they told me over and over again was the adult brain cannot change. Your brain builds itself when you're a baby and a little kid, but after the age of 7 or 14 or 22, some kind of magical age, it is laid down. You have the wires you have the connections you have, and we were told all that happens as you get older is those connections and those nerves die one by one, and that explains dementia, right? Sooner or later you just run out. And the lab I was in just turned that idea on its head. And I hope that if your listeners remember something that I've said today, I hope the main thing that they remember is, hey, none of that is true. The brain is not like a computer. It's not hardwired. That, hey, at any age, your brain is reorganizing and rebuilding and rewiring itself in response to what you ask it to do. And that raises a fascinating question, which is, hey, what is the right thing to ask your brain to do to stay healthy and engaged? As you put it a moment ago, hey, if doctors are telling us to stay mentally active, what's the right way to do it that, rewires the brain and builds brain health? And the great news about that is, we have learned an awful lot about that over the past 10 years, about exactly what are the right ways to drive brain plasticity, what are the right ways to kind of build brain health and brain reserve, so that even if you are getting some of these toxic proteins proteins building up in your brain for whatever reason, hey, your brain is wired in such a way that it is strong and resistant and resilient to those. And that's been a lot of really exciting learnings that we've done over the past years.
Yeah, and I think this engagement too is people have to evaluate, like we're talking about what type of engagement, but you were talking about bringing a casserole over to the neighbor or maybe meeting with family. Well, there's a lot of family dynamics that don't make you feel well.
Oh,
in a lot of families. And so that's not a healthy, in my opinion. And again, I have no degree in this at all, but I know what it feels like to get together with family or friends or colleagues where you don't feel like you fit in, and maybe you're just cleaning up after the party and bringing the food, but you're not, you're there and people think you're engaged, but you're really not.
Yeah. So what we would say is that, hey, all of these things, what they have to drive in the brain to make your brain more resilient to the effect of Alzheimer's and dementia is they have to drive new learning, right? So what makes a healthy brain different than an unhealthy brain, right? The main thing that's different is that the new brain is capable of doing, the healthy brain, that is to say, is capable of doing what the job of the brain is to do. And the job of the brain is actually learning and change, right? I talk to a lot of people, often people come to me as a brain scientist and they tell me, what's the job of the brain? Oh, it's for thinking, right? Well, I mean, not really, as it turns out. The reason we have such complex brains as humans is, hey, we have incredible adaptability, right? We can live in the frozen north, we can live in the jungles, we can live in the deserts, we can live in downtown San Francisco, and all of that is because our brains are so capable of change and rewiring and learning, we can adapt to any environment. And what that tells us is that a healthy brain can learn and change. And so when we think about what makes a brain healthy, it's that ability to keep doing it. And so the positive effects, in my view, the positive effects that we see for social engagement aren't just generally I spent time with my family. It's that I was doing things with family and friends that were challenging my brain, that were driving new learning, that were positive experiences. They engaged my attention. They engaged my reward. I felt good about them. That's what makes a brain healthy. It's not just hanging out with your mom who disowned you when you were 17 and you don't like her anymore, right? That's probably not brain healthy. And so when we look at brain plasticity, so what drives brain plasticity? This is what we learned from those experiments back in the day. If you want to drive brain plasticity, you have to ask a brain to be faster, right? You have to ask it to basically accelerate how quickly it processes information. You also have to ask it to be more accurate, right? If you've learned anything, there's no point in getting fast unless you're also actually accurate, right? Think about playing the piano. No point in trying to play the piano faster if you hit all the wrong notes, right? You have to be fast and accurate at the same time. You also have to engage your attention. Now, when you pay attention to something, your brain releases a chemical called acetylcholine. And what acetylcholine actually does is it turns on brain plasticity. When you're paying attention, your brain can rewire and rebuild itself. And we know that, right? If you were the kind of kid who was looking out the window during the math lesson, you probably didn't learn it, even though the teacher said it and it was on the board because you weren't paying attention. Your brain didn't release that acetylcholine, so your brain couldn't rewire to learn. And then you also have to be rewarded. Now, when you're rewarded, when something nice happens to you, your brain pumps another neurochemical called dopamine. Now, a lot of people have heard of dopamine. They think of that as, well, it's the pleasure chemical, it's the happiness chemical. And that's kind of right. But as a neuroscientist, what we would say is that dopamine is actually reinforcement learning. So when you do something and your brain thinks, oh, that was good, that worked out well for me, your brain pumps some dopamine, and that tells your brain to rewire itself to get more of that. Now, an easy example is like, okay, I took a bite of chocolate, and your brain likes chocolate. That's how we all are as humans. And so it pumps a little bit of dopamine, and then your brain rewires itself. So however you got that chocolate, your brain's like, well, let's do that again. And then you've eaten the whole chocolate bar, right? That's what happens to me. But that happens in anything we learn, right? If you're playing the piano and your teacher says you did a good job, then hey, that reinforces your brain's wiring to play the piano. So speed, accuracy, attention, and reward. If you have those four factors, you are going to rewire the brain and make it healthier. And that's true if you're doing, social connections, as we were just talking about. And it's true if you're doing other things in your life. But what we've been doing here at BrainHQ over the past years now is we've been building computerized brain training exercises that take that idea of rewiring the brain and they kind of concentrate it into a super powerful form that people can do on their computer or their phones and their tablets. So we can literally build brain training exercises devices that capture all of those good ways to rewire the brain and let people, build their brain health and rewire their brain through these brain training exercises. And that's been a really kind of exciting breakthrough in how we think about building brain health and resisting dementia.
Well, I have to ask you a question about the graphics behind you, because it looks like there's a meditation piece and there's a hearing piece and a calendar, and I'm assuming that's the brain. And it almost looks like a Twitter icon, but I'm sure it's not.
Yes. I'm in my office today in downtown San Francisco. We have quite a lot of very fun brain art. If I was in a different room, you'd be looking at posters from movies from like the 50s and 60s about like the giant brain that attacked America and very fun stuff like that.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
But here, this is a slogan that we have: think faster, focus better, and remember more. And that comes directly out of the science that we've done over the years that shows that, hey, by engaging in these brain plasticity-based computerized exercises, the science shows us that we can help people think faster, focus better, and remember more. We improve their speed, we improve their attention, and we improve their memory. And then the other things that you're seeing, they're fun and playful. There's a BrainHQ icon, as you can see. There's, of course, a brain icon itself, as you can see. But we also recognize that, hey, brain health is a multifaceted affair, right? BrainHQ training, which, as we're talking about, and we'll talk more about, I'm sure, in a moment, some fantastic results about how to build brain health. But hey, there are lots of good things that people should be doing to engage their brains and build brain health, and they should find things that are right for them. We talked about social connection. There's meditation and stress reduction, which is helpful for many people in building brain health. And there's things like eating a healthy diet. There's things like physical exercise. There's things like getting a good night's sleep. All of those things come together along with brain training to help people build healthy brains. But yeah. No, it's a very, very fun place to sit, and we have a very wonderful art and graphic design department here at Posit Science.
It draws attention and it makes people think on different levels, because I think a lot of times when people think of video games, they wouldn't think of, the sleep aspect or the meditation, kind of the slower paced.
Yeah. We would actually kind of tease that apart a little bit. So, we actually have used, and scientists using BrainHQ have actually compared BrainHQ directly to ordinary video games, and they've even compared BrainHQ directly to crossword puzzles. And, I want to loop back to what you asked about a moment ago, which is, hey, doctors tell us to stay mentally active. Well, what does that mean exactly? It turns out it does mean something specific. So often people ask me about crossword puzzles, right? And they say, hey, Henry, I do crossword puzzles. I do Sudoku. Does that mean I'm not going to get Alzheimer's? And I have to kind of break the bad news to them that actually it doesn't really show that protection. And in fact, there was a really fantastic study done by a scientist named Tim Salthouse at the University of Virginia many years ago. And he looked at a lot of people who did crossword puzzles and didn't, and kind of compared their cognitive function over time. And what he saw was that at any age, people who did crossword puzzles had better cognitive function, better memory, better speed, better attention. But the rates at which people declined as they got older were precisely the same if they did crossword puzzles or they didn't. And what does that tell us? It tells us that crossword puzzles don't slow cognitive decline, but hey, people who have good memory and attention like to do crossword puzzles, right? And that kind of makes sense. So we have done studies against each of those controls. One of the first clinical trials I ever ran here at Posit Science was with our brain plasticity-based brain training exercises. And we actually did a study with Mayo Clinic up in your neighborhood and University of Southern California. And that study looked at almost 500 healthy older adults. Half of them did these brain plasticity-based brain training exercises on BrainHQ that were designed to speed up their brains, make them more accurate, and improve that attention and reward processing in their brain. The other half of them did what you might call adult education, right? They watched educational DVDs like Sister Wendy's History of Art or Carl Sagan's Cosmos, and they actually answered quizzes about them at the end of each session. So both groups were kind of learning, but one group was learning in this way that built brain health and engaged brain plasticity, and the other group was learning what you might think of as facts and knowledge. And at the end of that study, what those researchers from Mayo and USC showed was that the folks who did that brain plasticity-based brain training, they improved their memory by about 10 years of function. So people who were in their 60s were performing more like people in their 50s. And that improvement was 4 times bigger than people who were doing ordinary kind of cognitive stimulation by learning new things. And so what did that tell us, right? That was the first insight that, hey, not all cognitive stimulation is the same, right? Like your doctor, right? It's not all forms of mental activity are equivalent. When we use these brain plasticity-based exercises that really speed up your brain, make it more accurate, improve your attention, engage your reward systems, hey, that builds a healthier brain than just kind of learning a whole bunch of new facts. And that healthier brain has better cognitive function. Then there was a beautiful follow-up study from that run by Fred Walensky at the University of Iowa. And he compared those brain training exercises to doing ordinary crossword puzzles. And once again showed that training your brain specifically with this brain plasticity idea that drove much bigger improvements in speed and attention than just doing crossword puzzles. And then in more recent studies, we've compared these brain training exercises to ordinary video games like, Candy Crush and various kind of things like that. Now, let me say right off the bat, I love video games. I play a lot of video games. My kids played a lot of video games when they were young. We had a great time together as a family. So I'm not here to diss video games. They're fun. If you like them, you should play them. But our studies have shown over and over again that these specific brain plasticity-based training exercises, which are designed to adapt to your unique brain and make your brain faster and more accurate, hey, they drive much bigger brain health changes and cognitive function changes than sitting down and just playing an ordinary game on your phone. And so that's really starting to carve out a path for, hey, when a doctor says mentally active, hey, what should you actually be doing? And it's not just anything, as it turns out. Kind of like what you were saying a moment ago. Your doctor might say socially connected. Well, hey, that doesn't necessarily mean stay socially connected with people that aren't a positive influence in your life, right? It means a very specific kind of social connections.
Well, and I can see with games too, because I hear this from my support groups all the time. People are like, I'm not a crossword puzzle person, but they go out and they buy them. And then I just think of the dread. That can't help your brain. I mean, if you're doing something that you don't enjoy, that probably isn't going to help you near as much because you're going to be sidetracked. You're not going to be as focused. You're going to be thinking, just get me out of here so I can check it off my list type thing. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. A couple thoughts on crosswords. So what do we know about driving brain plasticity? From all of that science that I talked about, if you're going to drive brain plasticity, if you're going to rewire the brain, you need to ask your brain to become faster and more accurate. And when you do crossword puzzles, it kind of feels like the gears are turning inside your brain. But hey, you don't actually have to be very fast, right? You can sit there and think about it for as long as you like. And so the crossword puzzles seem challenging, but like you say, a lot of the time your mind is wandering. You can't think of the word. You're kind of stuck. You're thinking about what else you have to do today. Hey, that's not pushing your brain in the way it needs to be pushed. The other thing about crossword puzzles is they're not adaptive. So what we know from the science of learning and the science of brain plasticity is that your brain changes. Your brain rewires itself when it is presented with the right level of difficulty. If something's too easy, well, hey, your brain doesn't need to change, so it doesn't. And at the same time, if something is too hard, well, your brain can't even get a hold of it, right? So it doesn't change. So when we build these brain training exercises in BrainHQ, they're constantly adapting to you, right? As you get it right, it's going to get a little harder to push your brain. But then if it's a little too far and you can't get it right anymore, well, hey, it's going to get easier again. It's going to back right down. And so, if you think about any learning you've done, that's the best way to learn, right? If you've had a good piano teacher, if you had a good French teacher, now a lot of people didn't, but if you did, you know that, hey, they kind of met you at the right level of challenge and your brain and your skills grew along with them. When you think about crossword puzzles, most people's experience in crossword puzzles is, hey, some of them are too easy, some of them are too hard, and as a result, your brain just doesn't change. It doesn't have to rewire itself. And so that's why we need something more than crossword and Sudoku to really drive improvements in brain health in this way.
I'm going to ask you something about another popular game out there, Wordle. Because it seems to touch on some of the things you're saying, but I'm sure the research is not near what you guys are doing. But and I personally don't play it, so just from what I've heard, but people like the competition and the fast pace of beating one another. They kind of get that reward, they get that engagement type thing because it's not an isolated game. Yeah. And they get to meet new friends. What are your thoughts on something like that?
I used to play a lot of Wordle, and it was very fun for me. My wife does Wordle, and she does the spelling bee on the New York Times every night as well. And hey, that's fun. And people should do things they enjoy, right? That's absolutely right. I like video games. People like Wordle. That's all wonderful. But if you think about Wordle from a brain plasticity perspective, again, well, it doesn't make you be fast, right? You can sit and you can stare at it for a long, long time trying to think of 5-letter words where the second letter is an E. You don't really have to be fast. You can stop and come back when you have some more time over lunch, right? So we're not asking our brain to be faster. The Wordle's not adaptive, right? When you get it, it's just whatever word it is today. Maybe it's a hard word for you and you can't get it. Maybe it's an easy word for you and you get it after 2 or 3 tries, but it doesn't adapt to your unique brain. And as a result of that, I would be very surprised to see that Wordle in a clinical trial, improved brain health in a meaningful way or improved cognitive function. I think it's just there for entertainment, if I can put it that way. And again, that's great. Don't get me wrong. I like games as much as the next person. But I would be very surprised if it had any positive benefits for cognitive function. I think to drive brain plasticity and drive improvements in brain health and dementia resistance and cognitive function, again, you just got to come back to those basics of what builds a healthier brain. Asking your brain to be faster, asking it to be more accurate, really strongly engaging your attention, and really strongly engaging your rewards. And Wordle's got little benefits in each of those, but probably not enough in any helpful way.
Well, and I'm glad you summarized that again for our audience, because it is a lot to take in. Because I think sometimes people think, well, if I'm doing this, so that's it, that they're all equal, and they're really not equal. And you've got the research to back that. So let's talk a little bit about the research and what it's saying about the brain training itself. You had mentioned in the beginning there was a lot of new research that just came out.
Yeah. So, I think we've been building these computerized brain training exercises based on this idea of brain plasticity for quite some time. And at all times, hey, we wanted to do great science to show that these worked. I never wanted people to feel like they just had to take my word for it, right? It's just like a new drug or a new medical device. It needs to go through a gold standard randomized controlled trial that really shows that it works. And hey, we have had 3 incredible trials that have come out over the past about 8 months at this point that have really pushed the science in an exciting new direction. So the first study that came out last October was a study funded by the National Institutes of Health and done with us and collaborators up in Canada at McGill University. And they had a new way to actually look directly at that attention chemical that I talked about in the brain, acetylcholine, right? Now, as you imagine, it's hard to see how much acetylcholine is in someone's brain, right? But they had developed a novel form of brain scanning that could directly measure in your brain or in my brain how much acetylcholine do we have. And what they did is they took a whole bunch of people up there in McGill and randomized them. So half of them did BrainHQ, brain plasticity exercises, and half of them did ordinary video games like we were just talking about. And then before and after, they measured, well, how much acetylcholine is the brain producing? Could we actually train the brain to produce more acetylcholine? And what they saw was incredibly exciting because for the first time, they showed that actually you can. right?
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
That folks who did the BrainHQ brain training exercises actually significantly improved the amount of acetylcholine their brains were pumping out. And that's kind of thrilling because normally what happens as we get older is the level of acetylcholine produced just kind of goes down and down and down over the years. And it had never been known and never been shown that that in fact was reversible, that the same way you might build a healthier heart or build healthier muscles, you could actually build a healthier brain by pumping more acetylcholine. And again, that was about 10 years of acetylcholine improvement. People in their 60s reversed their acetylcholine production more like the people in their 50s. And that's exciting because we know that this chemical is involved in attention, it's involved in memory, and then back to what we were talking about before, it is actually one of the things that really declines during the onset of Alzheimer's. So that raised the question, hey, we're clearly building a healthier brain. That was a breakthrough result, got a lot of media attention, a lot of scientific attention. Hey, are we building healthier brains? Kind of like those nuns we were talking about right up in Mankato. So the next study that came out in February. And this was also a study funded by the National Institutes of Health here. And this was an incredible study. They actually had been doing a large-scale study of cognitive training. They had used a BrainHQ training exercise with some people. They had also had some classroom memory training and classroom reasoning training for other people and a control group. And the most amazing thing about this is that study went on for 20 years. So at the beginning of the study, they did brain training for about 20 hours over the course of a couple of weeks in the first 3 years. Not that much brain training. And then they followed these folks for the next 20 years and they looked at their Medicare records and they asked the question, well, who got dementia and who didn't, right? And the breakthrough that they saw was that about half of the people in the control group got dementia. And that was exactly the same for folks who did memory exercises or reasoning exercises. But the folks who did those computerized brain training exercises, and in particular, the folks who did them regularly, did them in the first year, did some booster training in the third year, those folks actually had a 25% reduction in their risk of going on to Alzheimer's and dementia. And that's an incredible breakthrough, right? Everything we've been talking about here, no one has ever, until this date, done a gold standard randomized controlled trial that shows that one specific thing, one specific form of mental activity, you might say, actually reduces the risk of going on to dementia. And in Medicare records, which is a gold standard measure of whether you have dementia or not. So that study also got a huge amount of attention, and it kind of made sense, right? In the previous study, we showed we could make the brain healthier by pumping more of this chemical, acetylcholine. And now we see that, hey, in the folks who did that, they actually reduced their risk of going on to dementia in that way. So maybe the biology is making some sense by doing these brain training exercises, by building a healthier brain, by pumping more acetylcholine, by driving brain plasticity. Hey, we've made a brain more resilient to the onset of Alzheimer's disease. And so we reduced that risk by 25%. And then just a few weeks ago, just to put a cherry on the top of this incredible Brain Health Sunday, if I can put it that way, a study came out at the Alzheimer's Association meeting in London, and they showed for the first time in a randomized controlled trial that the folks who did BrainHQ training, as opposed to the control group, they actually used blood measurements to see, hey, how much of those toxic proteins are building up in the brain? And there's been a big breakthrough there. We don't actually have to go into the brain anymore. We can actually look at your blood and see, well, how much of these toxic proteins are building up. And that study showed that in people who did the BrainHQ training exercises, they actually lowered the amount of amyloid protein, this protein that's associated with Alzheimer's disease, in the blood and in the brain as a result. So now the story is really adding up, right? We're improving brain health by doing brain plasticity or pumping more acetylcholine. That's reducing the risk of Alzheimer's. And we see that we're actually changing the levels of this toxic protein of amyloid in the brain. And so that all sums up to tell us that these brain training exercises built on brain plasticity, they are actually changing the fundamental wiring and biology of the brain to build brain health. So exactly in the same way your doctor might say, hey, I'm worried about your heart health. I want you to go out and get some more cardiac exercise, right? I want you to do some walking. I want you to do some swimming. And because they know that, hey, that changes the biology of your muscles and your vasculature and your heart, and you're less likely to get a heart attack. What we're seeing now across these studies is that the right kind of brain exercise, not every kind of brain exercise, the right kind of brain exercise can build a healthier brain and reduce the risk of going on to dementia in that way. And that's such an incredible change in how we think about brain health, right? You and I were both talking about, in your case, your mom, and in my case, my grandfather before. And hey, at that time, we didn't think anything could change that rate of decline, right? It was like, well, take care of them, but they're on a one-way street here. And what these studies over the past 8 months tell us is, hey, we got to throw that idea out. There are specific things we can do before this disease has its onset, and they're going to build healthier brains, and they're going to make people more resistant to it and lower that risk of going on dementia. And to me, that's just an incredibly exciting and hopeful change. And, maybe one of the most important changes in the science and in how we think about Alzheimer's disease over the past 25 years at this point. So.
Oh, huge 25%, and then the backing of 3 separate studies kind of all building on one another. I mean, that is absolutely massive. Now, I think one of the questions my audience would be interested in is like, how much time do I have to commit to this? Do I got to do this 8 hours a day? What do I have to do here?
Well, let me ask you a quick question, Lori, maybe yourself or speaking on behalf of your audience. How much brain training would you think would be worth it to reduce your own risk of going on to Alzheimer's and dementia by 25%?
I think part of an answer for myself or anyone, is going to be what they have going on in their lives as far as commitments.
Yep,
are they still working? Are they the sole party? Do they have a partner? Are they retired? Okay. I think some of that comes into play.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, and I have a different outlook on dementia in some ways. I think this is super, super exciting though. So don't get me wrong there, but I'm not as scared of it, I guess, as so many other people are, because again, I think I believe, right, wrong, or indifferent, that my mom lived 30 years because she was engaged and she felt part. And again, it wasn't necessarily through games, it was through another avenue. Again, it didn't have the effect for sure of what you're showing. And I think that's massively huge. I also have the mentality that I don't have to live forever either.
I actually agree with that. I think we probably actually agree here a lot. I am with you. I don't think we should want to live forever. We need to make space for our kids and our grandkids. And I actually don't want people to be scared of Alzheimer's and dementia. We are not in the business here at BrainHQ of fear-based communications. I want people to think of the early signs of Alzheimer's and dementia the way you might think of the early signs of heart disease, which is, hey, you might want to take steps to have a healthier heart or a healthier brain. So you have to go through that. But I think the fear of it is often paralyzing for people. We don't want to think about it at all. And we also often think about it like, well, it's like a bolt from the blue, right? There's nothing I can do. It's going to happen when it happens. And I'm very afraid of it. And so I'm just going to kind of not think about it because I think it's outside of my control. I really want people to think about this as something that is under their control. It's not something to be feared or be scared of, but it is something to manage so you make life choices that get you in the place that you want to be. I want to be careful on how I put things to kind of emphasize that. What we want with BrainHQ training or any of the things we're talking about, diet and sleep and social connections, is we want to give people control over kind of where their brain health is. And, with that control is education and the ability to make trade-offs and all kinds of things. But I don't want people to be terrified. I don't want them to feel like, my hands aren't on the wheel of the car and the car is just driving off the cliff, right? I'm going to say, hey, the science tells us you can steer this thing in a direction that you want to be in. All that being said, I think the amazing news about brain training is you don't have to do that much. So in the study that I just talked about, where people reduced the risk of going on to dementia and Alzheimer's by 25%, they did an initial dose of brain training where they did 2 hours of brain training a week for just 5 weeks, right? So 10 hours total right off the bat. And then they took a break. And then at the end of a year, they went back and did some booster training where they did 5 more hours of training. And then they took another break. And then 3 years later, they did some more booster training for 5 hours. And then they didn't do any more brain training for the next 20 years. Right?
Wow.
So we're not talking about a big time commitment here. Now it is some, right? You have to sit down and do it. Again, it's like learning the piano. You got to practice. You got to get better. But that is not a lot of brain training to get a pretty fantastic result. The study that I talked about where the researchers up at McGill and Posit Science showed that people improved their acetylcholine levels. They did a half an hour of brain training a day for just 10 weeks. Right. And then they stopped.
Wow.
And so, often when people think about this, they think, well, gosh, can I do this? Like you said, is this 8 hours a day for the rest of my life? And absolutely it is not. Right. It's more like, it's more like any physical fitness activity, right? And, it's even less, right? Most people who decide to start exercising, well, you got to exercise every week for the rest of your life, don't you? And what the brain training results show us is actually you can boost your brain up and then, hey, you can take a little break and you can go out and see your friends and learn how to swim and go for hikes or whatever else you might want to do. And then you should come back and reboost your brain training up. And that's really where I think the future of this is, right? If I want to step way back on my soapbox, what I would say is that, hey, we're entering a really exciting time, which is that we are about to be in the age where people can manage and control their own brain health. And, we see a world where people are going to their doctor and they're getting a computerized check-in. Well, hey, how much brain reserve do you have? Is the gas tank full? And hey, if it's full, live your life, man. That's great. On the other hand, if the gas tank is moving towards empty, hey, here are some things that science shows us. Here are some brain training exercises that science shows us can refill that gas tank. And how much you should do? Well, hey, get yourself into a better, lower risky zone that is right for you, right? Some people want to do a lot and really lower their risk as much as they can. Some people are busy. They got things going on. Let's do a little and reduce your risk. And then, hey, come and get a checkup again. We want people to think about brain health the same way you think about heart health. And in that sense, hey, these tools are really coming into play. We're not quite there yet. I just went to my doctor this morning. They did not give me a brain health check-in, but they will in the future. And that's what we want. We want people to have that sense of control. This is not something that's out of control. This is not something that's genetics or family history or bad luck. It's something that you can know about with you and your doctor. It's something you can take evidence-based actions to improve. It doesn't have to consume your life, but it can be a part of your life. And hey, as you do that, you're going to be living the life that you choose to live as you get older. And I think that's what we want for all of ourselves. And that's what we want for our loved ones. So it is an incredibly exciting time to be kind of seeing these scientific breakthroughs roll out and seeing this real ability to deliver benefit to just about anyone.
It's really exciting. And the approach, because I think so often when people change their diet or start a workout, it's so strict and it's so overwhelming that they quit.
Yeah, exactly.
And so this just sounds like there's flexibility and there's great outcomes. And again, no reason not to look into it and to reduce the fear as well. So I want to be conscious of your time. I want to make sure that we let people know how to find BrainHQ, which is just brainhq.com. Or
That's
they
right.
can email at support@brainhq.com. You are also on Instagram and Facebook. So again, thank you so much. It's been a fabulous conversation.
Yeah, it's really been enjoyable talking to you. And hey, for people who go directly to the website or download the app, the great news is you can sign up for free. It'll actually give you a free brain training exercise every day. You can try it out and see if it's right for you. You don't have to put your credit card in, just give it a go. And then if you choose to subscribe, you'll unlock all the brain training exercises as well as the personal trainer that schedules them for you. And hey, that's an easy way to dive in. And then also just to help your listeners out, if you do want to reach out to us, email us at support@brainhq.com. If you want us to call you, just shoot us a note and ask for a call. But we would love to talk to anyone who wants to learn more about brain training and brain health in this way. It's been really, really fun to talk to you, Lori. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you. And to our listeners, I always ask you to be a giver of hope. Like, click, and share. There are people in your sphere that need this information. Help take the scary out of dementia. And,
I agree completely.
Create a little fun here.
Create some fun, do some good, have some control. But no, we don't need anyone to be scared. We need people to be in control. So I love that message. Thank you for having me on, Lori.
Thank you. Everyone, take care. Again, you can always check out Alzheimer Speaks and Dementia Map for more wonderful resources as well. Till next time, bye now.
Hey everybody, Jared Sebestier, host of Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30 or 40 plus years, retiring on Friday without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.